Welcome to my channel where OP buys the parking lot the company is leasing from his boss after he gets fired for being 2 minutes late. Our next Reddit post is from a user. This happened about 15 years ago. I was an IT project manager working in Australia. My company leased their office space from a property developer who was also our director's brother. The office was quite small, with only around 20 employees. We didn't have an official HR department, so all matters were handled by the director. We also had a very small car park that could barely fit half of the staff, meaning some people had to park out on the street. There was this one guy who worked in accounts payable. He would come in at 8:30 a.m. and leave at 4:30 p.m. every single day. He was incredibly lazy and never offered to do anything extra, even if it was something that would benefit him. But the job required him to be there when deliveries came in, and when we left at 5 p.m., the office would be empty. However, he often asked me to take messages or phone calls for him, because he did want to get off his butt. The company policy said that you were paid for any overtime you worked over 40 hours a week, and this guy clocked in and out using a time clock and was careful to never do any overtime. I'm talking like the most diligent clock watcher I've ever seen. If you needed to leave early to make a doctor's appointment or something, then too bad. Just don't come in tomorrow and work late to catch up. He was terrible. I don't like him at all. Well, one day the director went on holidays and left us under the care of the operations manager, who was also his brother. One morning I was doing some urgent work for a client and lost track of time. The next thing I knew, it was 8:05 a.m. and my start time was 8 a.m. I immediately clocked in and went to see the operations manager to explain the situation. He said not to worry about it and that I shouldn't let it happen again. Well, of course, I thought nothing of it and went back to work. A couple of weeks later, the operations manager called me into his office. I went in there expecting praise for the job I'd done on that client's project. Instead, he gave me a hard time about punching in 2 minutes late one morning. Apparently, he had been instructed by the director to fire me for being late. I explained that I'd asked him about it previously and he told me not to worry, but he still insisted that I had to go. So I signed the paperwork and left. I wasn't angry until I read the letter that they sent me. It stated that my employment was terminated due to excessive tardiness and absenteeism, which was a bold-faced lie. I'd only ever been late once and never missed a day. I called the operations manager to discuss the discrepancy, but he basically told me to read the contract. I should have known better than to trust these guys. I didn't sign the contract when I started working there. They just handed it to me, made me tick boxes to agree to everything, and told me to get back to work. It was a standard contract that applied to everyone. As I was reading through it, I noticed that they tried to insert a term saying that they could terminate my contract with 2 weeks' notice or pay out 1 week's wages in lieu of notice. However, that clause had been crossed out and initialed by the director. So I still had the right to 2 weeks' notice. I was only an hour into my first day of unemployment. I had a good feeling that I was going to use this. I called the director at home and asked why he had lied about the reason for my dismissal. He said that it was because the operations manager had given me a hard time about it, and he had backed him up. I told him that they had lied in my termination letter, and he denied it. At this point, I was getting mad, so I told him that I was going to sue him for breach of contract. I told him that I was seeking both my 2 weeks' pay and compensation for the damage to my professional reputation caused by the false statement in the termination letter. He told me to go ahead because he had insurance for this sort of stuff. That's when I hung up. It turns out that they hadn't paid into their insurance policy. When I took them to court, they didn't show up. They probably thought that I would just go away after they got sued. They thought wrong. The judge awarded me 4 weeks' pay for breach of contract and $5,000 for damages. Also, because they had listed the reason for termination incorrectly, they couldn't use that as a reason for refusing me future employment. The judge told me to go after my previous position because they didn't have a legitimate reason to fire me. But after all of that, the best part was yet to come. You see, when the director went on holidays, the operations manager had to run the business as well. The company was leasing the office building from someone else. I found out who that someone was, and I contacted them. I said that I used to work there and that I heard they were having trouble with their lease. I told them that I knew of another commercial property owner who might be interested in buying the building. I offered to put them in touch, but only if they rehired me. They agreed and I got my old job back. Then I found out that my old boss was leasing the parking lot from someone else. I called them up and said that I heard that they were having trouble with their lease, and I knew of another commercial property owner who might be interested in buying the parking lot. I offered to put them in touch, but only if they raised my rent. They agreed and I bought the parking lot. Now every month I send my boss a check for 10% more than he used to pay. And he has no idea that it's me. How much did you raise the rent by exactly? Because $1,000 a month would suck, but $10,000 a month would be life-changing. Our next Reddit post is from another user. A little story from when I worked in sales. My dad was one of the owners of a hardware store chain that served rural America. One of the stores was in a small town of about 500 people. It was a big deal. The main salesperson at this store was a guy we'll call Kenny. Kenny had been there since before my dad bought the place, and he was great at what he did. Everyone loved Kenny. Now, I should mention that this was back in the 90s and cell phones weren't really a thing outside of the office. It was extremely rare to see someone walking around with a cell phone. Well, one day my dad got a call from the manager of that particular store. Apparently, Kenny was late for work and nobody knew where he was. They couldn't get a hold of him because he didn't have a cell phone. When Kenny finally showed up, the manager chewed him out for being late and not being able to be contacted. Kenny apologized and said it would never happen again, but the manager said that was it. He was fired. My dad just shook his head, but ultimately respected the manager's decision. Fast forward a few months and business is booming at all the stores except for that one. They can't seem to sell anything. My dad and the manager are racking their brains trying to figure it out. Then one day, my dad had a brainwave. He drove to the local newspaper office and asked if they could run a classified ad for him. It was basically a help-wanted ad for a new salesperson at the store. The ad ran for a week, and the following Monday, they had dozens of applications for the open position. But that wasn't the end of the story. See, when Kenny saw the ad, he was crushed. Not only was he looking for a job, but he had recently moved and didn't know anyone in the area. The ad was for a store 20 miles away. He didn't drive a car, so he had to hitchhike. Kenny shows up at the store, drenched in sweat and out of breath, and asks if they're still hiring. The manager looked at him and asked, "Are you the guy from the newspaper ad?" Kenny replied, "Yes, sir." The manager then said, "Well, you're hired." Kenny was ecstatic, but he was confused. He asked why they were hiring him when they had dozens of other applicants. The manager just smiled and said, "We don't need anyone else. You're the best." Turns out that everyone in that small town saw that ad and decided to boycott that store because they had fired such a good employee for something so stupid. Boycott hardware store 20 miles away. Boycott hardware store 20 miles away. Boycott hardware store 20 miles away. So my dad ended up buying Kenny a brand new pickup truck, and they drove around in that town together handing out flyers telling everyone that Kenny was back and to come on back to the store. Within 5 years, that store was the top revenue producer, and the dad even bought Kenny a house. That was my channel. And if you like this content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. Also, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day.